no matter who you ask for advice on winning the lottery, the answer is always the same: get a lawyer. It's a good point. After all, can any of us really claim we know how to handle millions and millions of dollars? I can't. So a lawyer and financial advisor is basically essential if you don't want to go broke or get scammed. Unless the lawyer is the one you need to worry about. The lottery lawyer, Jason Kurland, was every lottery winner's worst nightmare. But he was caught and his prison sentence was just announced. Has justice been served? Let's find out. But first, what did he do? Well, let's start at the beginning. One day, lawyer Jason Kurland had an idea. He figured he could make a lot more cash by offering his services to lottery winners. He wasn't wrong. There's a lot of cash to be made from rich people, especially if they have no experience in how to protect themselves. Jason set up a new business. He started calling himself the Lottery Lawyer, which turned out to be a pretty brilliant marketing strategy. Just think about it. If you've just won the lottery and you're looking for professional help, you're going to go online and type in something like "lawyer for lottery winner." Well, his website was lotterylawyer.com, so he's always going to be the first thing that pops up. But that wasn't the only way he was making a name for himself. In fact, you might even have seen him before. He started popping up on American TV a lot. Everyone wanted to know his advice anytime there was a big jackpot up for grabs. All of this would have been totally fine if he really wanted to help lottery winners. But that wasn't the plan. See, what his lottery winner clients didn't know is that Jason had a habit of hanging out with some pretty shady people. Jason's main business partner was Francis Smukler, an ex-stockbroker who loved flashing cash, even if he didn't always have any. He'd grown up next door to the actual Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort. Maybe that's why he decided to become a stockbroker. But it's also true that while working as a stockbroker, he'd been at the receiving end of hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of lawsuits, which claimed Smukler and the firm he worked for had mismanaged their clients' funds. That's about the only factual information you can find about Smukler's past. He really enjoys lying to make himself look more wealthy and impressive. The third member of their team was Francesco Russo, a pretty good person to have on your team if you're going to move into the world of crime, because he knew the criminal justice system inside out. That's because his grandfather was Andy "Mush" Russo, the infamous head of the Colombo crime family. Francesco's dad had died in prison for his role in the family's crime business. Francesco himself hadn't joined the family business, but he sure knew his way around a crime. The three had a number of associates who were in on Jason's business. Christopher Cerchio was a seemingly honest entrepreneur who ran a plumbing business, but he'd also once been a soldier for the Genovese crime family and had several convictions for tax fraud, big rigging, and bribery. Another of their associates was Greg Altieri, a wholesale jeweler with a particular knack for Ponzi schemes. And finally, there was Jason's real-life brother-in-law, Scott Blyer, better known as the amazingly shady name, Dr. B. Fixin. He was a plastic surgeon known for his specialty, Brazilian butt lifts. His surgery lobby featured a stripper pole and walls decorated with huge butts that lit up in neon lights if you spanked them. I think you can agree, that's not the cast of characters you want handling your lottery winnings. Only the people who came to Jason for advice had no idea that any of these people were involved with him. They thought they were speaking to a reputable lawyer who cared, and one of them was the winner of the biggest ever Mega Millions jackpot. She's still anonymous, so we'll call her Jane. Jane was in her mid-50s and living an ordinary life with her husband in South Carolina, when, one day in 2018, her life changed forever. She'd purchased a Mega Millions lottery ticket, never really expecting anything to come out of it. You know what it's like. There's a rollover jackpot, so you figure you can try your luck and buy a ticket. Normally, it leads to nothing, but Jane had a lot more luck than she realized. Overnight, she'd become the recipient of the largest ever lottery win by a single ticket holder. She'd now had a whopping $1.5 billion. Yeah, there have been bigger jackpot wins since, but at the time, nobody had ever won that much cash in the lottery. Jane realized pretty quick that she had no idea what to do with that staggering amount of money. She needed help. She started researching all kinds of people who might be able to advise her, with her husband trying to help. They looked for financial advisors, accountants, investment firms, and of course, lawyers. So, when Jason showed up on a TV morning show that Jane was watching, he seemed exactly like the person she was looking for. After all, the people interviewing him were saying he was an expert when it came to helping lottery winners who were suddenly looking for help with a big jackpot. Jane and her husband called him from a burner phone, not wanting him to have their real number if they decided he wasn't the right person. But after talking to him, they figured they couldn't really have found anyone better. They hired him to help them stay anonymous and collect their winnings. They chose the lump sum, which means they took home $878 million before taxes. Jason got a whopping $200,000 as a consultation fee. You can't help but to think how much worse it was that he'd still decide to steal from them when he was earning so much money for legitimate work. After receiving the prize, the money was split up among a few different bank accounts, but all those accounts were actually in Jason's name. There was a reason for this weird detail. It helped Jane and her husband to stay anonymous. But it also meant that Jason had access to those bank accounts without the bank asking questions. First, the couple asked Jason to give some of the money to a few different charities. Then, they started talking about investments. They didn't want any high-risk investments, though. Jane and her husband were hoping to pass the money down, and there wasn't any need to take risks when simply putting the money into savings accounts would have been more than enough. They paid Jason $50,000 per month to look after their investments. In exchange, Jason told the couple they should invest in two different firms, one called JBMML and another called Cheddar Capital. He said the investments would be worth tens of millions of dollars. The earnings would be put into a fund by the name of Cedar Ridge Capital, a fund shared by 10 of Jane's close family members. The idea was that the earnings from the investment would be split between them, earning each a monthly income of $12,500. There's no doubt that sounds like an amazing deal. Except, pretty soon, the payments to Jane's family members got further and further apart. The family was getting concerned, but the worst news was about to come. Jason had convinced Jane to buy 3 racehorses for a shocking $1 million. But when they checked, only 2 of the horses had been bought, and the money for the third one had disappeared. Then one day, the FBI came knocking. They informed Jane that they were investigating the diamond merchant that Jason had invested his money in. Jason had invested a shocking $12.5 million of Jane's money into a business, which was being watched by the FBI as a suspected Ponzi scheme. That's definitely not what you want to hear when you've put millions of dollars into a business. They still had no idea that Cheddar Capital, the other business Jason had invested their money in, was also borderline illegal. It was offering small loans to businesses who couldn't get a bank loan. But these loans came with interest rates as shockingly high as 400%. The company also set up contracts to allow them to seize assets from people they'd loaned money to for almost no reason at all. Jason hadn't exactly told his clients any of this when he convinced them to invest their money into the company. All of this sounds pretty bad, but Jane was only the most famous of Jason's clients. There were loads more people in exactly the same position. Jason's whole setup wasn't exactly unlike a Ponzi scheme, too. He'd been luring people in slowly by investing small amounts of their money winnings into legit businesses. He'd let that happen for a while, paying his victims often in exactly the way he'd promised. I know, that doesn't sound like much of a scam, but it was only the first step. It was all about gaining the trust of his millionaire clients. Once they felt safe, he'd start investing their millions in his friends' shady businesses. But it wasn't just about the investments. Every time Jason invested money with his friends, they'd give him a cut. His clients had no idea about this not-so-little bonus Jason was receiving every time he invested their money. He was quickly collecting a mind-blowing amount of cash. Don't forget, he was already earning tens of thousands of dollars in fees his lottery winner clients were happily paying him. Add all his clients together, and his salary was coming out to hundreds of thousands. He didn't need to steal. All his crimes were motivated by pure greed. And it was even easier to be greedy when he looked at the bank balances of his lucky clients. His TV appearances meant more and more lottery winners were coming to him for help. After all, They were being told by news channels that Jason was a reputable lawyer and the expert on lottery winnings. And let's not forget, it's super easy for lottery winners to lose everything. These people weren't being stupid, they were doing the right thing. He didn't even have to go looking for people to steal from, they were coming to him. Then, it was just a matter of gaining their trust. And he was seriously good at it. He was even convincing most of his clients to hire the banker and accountant he was recommending, which sure helped him. If you include Jane's record-breaking jackpot, Jason's collection of clients had a combined bank balance of over $3 billion. And he clearly wanted all of it for himself. A lot of the time, the winners he was stealing millions from didn't even notice their money was going missing. Remember we mentioned he put Jane's bank account in his own name? She wasn't the only one. And him being in control of those accounts made it pretty difficult for winners to spot their millions were disappearing. On one occasion, he convinced Jane and her husband to invest a whopping $19.5 million into yet another shady business venture. They agreed. But when Jason spoke to his friend running the operation, he was told they actually needed twice the amount to get started. So, Jason simply took another $19 million out of Jane's account, without mentioning it. She had no way of knowing this had happened. Remember, there were no red flags because she'd legally given him control of the account. The bank wasn't about to notify her that $19 million had gone missing because they didn't know he had no right to take the money. Jane was not the only person he was doing this to. He'd often take a little off of multiple accounts, slowly gathering money from his clients. And not all of it was being invested. Some of it was being spent on a lavish lifestyle that Jason and his friends were enjoying. Often while his lottery-winning clients were trying to live a normal lifestyle so they didn't lose their new wealth. Soon, they not only owned huge houses, but also a private jet. They'd also spent the stolen money on not just one, but two giant yachts. Spending sprees, Land Rovers, and country club memberships were soon purchased too, with most of the money running through Cheddar Capital's business accounts to make it look less suspicious. One of the gang members was even living shamelessly in an $11,000 per month Manhattan apartment and paying for a personal chauffeur to drive him around New York City in a Cadillac. They were living it up. But, as you know, it didn't last. So, where did they go wrong? Well, remember we mentioned the FBI was investigating one of the businesses that Jason was investing his clients' money into? That business was Altieri's diamond dealership. Altieri had spotted Jason's gang, thanks to their money-lending businesses. He was in need of new investors after someone claiming to be an oil heir had ghosted him. Altieri told Jason he was using the money to buy diamonds at clear-out prices, then sell them onto reputable companies like JCPenney for incredible profits, up to 70%. It sounded like a good deal to everyone. Not even Jason realized that the diamond business was actually a Ponzi scheme. Altieri wasn't buying diamonds. By the time Jason invested $20 million from his lottery-winning clients, Altieri was already using that money to pay off his previous investors. Jason realized what was happening when payments from Altieri started disappearing. Now, Jason found himself scrambling to keep his lottery clients happy, even though he had no cash to pay them. They were starting to get very suspicious, and Jason wasn't suspicious enough. He thought he had one last calling card. He'd given Altieri a loan of $250,000. He was now claiming that Altieri owed them $400,000 in exchange. Altieri, obviously, couldn't pay. So, Russo and Smukler started pressuring him. Soon, the pressure turned into threats. Russo called Altieri, telling him he'd put a bullet in everyone's head. A few days later, he got another call, this time from Smukler, who was talking about ripping the heads off every member of Altieri's family. They thought they were winning, but they had no idea that Altieri was working with the government. They offered him a deal, and he took it. So while they thought they were intimidating him by threatening him over the phone, Altieri was recording the calls and handing them over to the police. In July 2020, Altieri was charged with fraud. He'd lost about $200 million given to him by investors. But he was only the first member of Jason's gang to go down. At the time, Jason had no idea that the FBI were onto him. It was at this time that he thought Cherkio had come up with a plan to bail them out. They were going to ship in face masks at the height of the pandemic and resell them for a huge profit. Jason put $20 million into it from Jane, who believed she was investing in something that would help people. She even asked Jason to donate the interest she'd earned to charity. He told her it would be about $300,000 per month. The money was never invested. Cherkio simply kept it for himself, even when Jason gave him another $19.5 million of Jane's money, which she had no idea about. But all Jason's hope that he'd found a way out was gone. The group was rounded up and charged with fraud, money laundering, and a collection of other charges in August 2020. According to the court documents, Jason was accused of misusing $107 million of his client's money and either stealing or losing another $80 million. They'd all tried pointing fingers at each other, but luckily, the authorities didn't buy it. Jason was the only member of the gang to plead not guilty. In fact, he claimed he was only a victim who'd been tricked by all the other members of the gang. They didn't buy that either, and neither do we. It seems pretty clear that Jason was guilty from the start. And not just because he and his scheming friends were caught on tape gloating about how much money they'd stolen. If Jane was asked in court if she could have done anything different to avoid being scammed, she said that Jason was always going to scam her no matter what she did. Sure, she could have gone to another lawyer, but she and the other victims had no way of knowing that Jason wasn't working to help them. So, did he get what he deserved at the sentencing? Or did they let him off too easy? You'll be glad to hear that he had finally been sentenced to a very long 13 years in federal prison for his crimes. That's 1 year less than the maximum sentence. But it's pretty long. He wasn't the only member of the gang being sentenced either. Cherkio also got 5 years for his involvement. You'll also be glad to hear that the jail time wasn't their only punishment. The government has been taking steps to get some of the money back for Jason's victims. To do this, they've taken control of all Jason's main bank accounts and his capital account with the law firm he was a part of. His job there was earning him $500,000 per year, but he's obviously been fired now. He currently only had $400,000 left to his name. We can only hope the lottery winners he scammed get their money back. We're glad to see that justice won this time, but even though the lottery winners were the victims this time, sometimes they're the ones who go to jail. Don't believe me? Check out this list of lottery winners who went straight to jail.